You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and let's start today's episode with a case suggestion by JC. She's a loyal Rise in Crime listener. Now for this story, we have to go back to October 5th of 2022 in Savannah, Georgia, when Leilani Simon reported her son missing. On that Wednesday morning, 20-month-old Quinton Simon was supposedly playing in his playpen at his home in Savannah that he shared with his mom, his siblings, and his grandparents. Well, 3 hours later, his mother, Leilani, made contact with police saying her son, Quinton, was missing. She was adamant that she found the front door open and that someone had entered the home and taken little Quinton. Police marshaled their resources quickly, using the Savannah Police Department, the FBI, the Chatham County Police, and the Liberty County Sheriff's Office K-9 team. Helicopters were also dispatched, and roads near Leilani's home were shut down to aid in the search efforts. So we have all of the officials looking together as a team, but so are the neighbors and friends that are looking for little Quinton. By Thursday, Chatham County Police Chief Jeff Hadley holds a press conference clarifying that Quinton is a missing person investigation. He's basically dispelling rumors that Quinton might be dead. Just one day later, Chief Hadley is back at that podium. He's actually using his regularly scheduled presentation time at the Chatham County Commissioners meeting to speak about Quinton and his missing persons case. He already announced that the case is complicated because Quinton's grandparents, that's Thomas and Billy Joel Howell, they're the ones who live in the home. Well, they're actually the custodians of Quinton, and it's not just that. Those custodians or grandparents, they're actively working to remove Leilani and her boyfriend, Daniel Youngkin, from the home and also from Quinton's life. So it seems like they were trying to protect little Quinton, but after researching the case, I'm not so sure of that anymore. But initially, to investigators, it looks like Daniel and Leilani have some questionable habits that might be harming the toddler. Well, the intensive searches are continuing, with Chief Hadley reporting that ponds and a backyard pool are being heavily investigated. On Saturday, so that's just 4 days since his reported disappearance, the direction of the searches just kind of changes slightly. Chief Hadley lets the public know they are no longer in need of volunteers. He softly explains that the FBI and the marshaled resources are the most important part of the search at this point. For me, it kind of feels like even though it's a missing persons case, the direction has veered towards looking for human remains. Now, I could be wrong, but that's how I'm reading the genesis of the searches. By Sunday, Chief Hadley announces that they aren't extending their search area. Instead, they're recanvassing the areas that they have already searched. And then on Monday, the fire department drains the backyard pool at Quinton's home. Chief Hadley holds another press conference, and despite refusing to release the initial 911 call, he's being fairly forthright with the understandable nervous community. Just imagine living near here and believing that someone just opened a door to a home and took a child. Of course, the community wants updates regularly. Well, by Tuesday, that's 6 days since he's been reported missing, the investigation has clearly shifted. The Chatham County Police do not hold a press conference. They instead release a statement saying that they have seized evidence that they believe will bring the case to a close. Now, if the police have changed course, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, well, they haven't. They issued a statement at that time, right after the CCPD statement, urging community members to continue their search for Quinton Simon and reassuring people that they're working to bring Quinton safely home. So we've got them thinking Quinton's still alive, and we got the police department acting like Quinton is probably deceased at this point. Well, 1 week after his reported disappearance, the CCPD again issues only a statement. There is no press conference. In that statement, they say they are searching the home again, this time with dogs, and that they will update the public shortly. They also discreetly tell the family that they believe Quinton is deceased. They then tell the family that the prime suspect is his mother, Leilani. However, they've not arrested Leilani, at least as of that Wednesday. On Thursday, they publicly shared what they had only shared with the family, that Leilani is the prime suspect in Quinton's death. And then the next 4 days are just quiet on the police front. There's no news, no arrests, and then it's Tuesday, almost 2 full weeks after Quinton has been missing. And in conjunction with the FBI, the police informed the public that Quinton's little body was placed in a dumpster, and that dumpster was emptied of its contents, and those contents were then dumped into the landfill. At this point, that landfill is now the primary search point for investigators. During the next few days, the community starts to kind of really speak out. They are frustrated when they see Leilani and her mother getting drunk at a local bar. They also form protests outside of Quinton's family home. Leilani also grants an interview where she states that she hopes her son is found happy and alive. And then the next few weeks were nothing but continued searching of the landfill and continued outrage in the community. More protesters are arrested outside of the Simon family home. And in a bizarre twist of fate, little Quinton's paternal grandfather, okay, that's not the one that he lived with, it's his paternal grandfather. Well, he's killed in an auto accident. Finally, on November 18th, after days and days of landfill searches, human remains are discovered by authorities. 3 days later, Leilani is arrested and charged with murdering her 20-month-old son. She is also charged with concealing the death of a toddler, supplying false statements to law enforcement, and false report of a crime. Over the next months, the wheels of justice grind slowly. Additional charges are added to Leilani's growing list, and even Leilani's mother, Billie Jo, well, her antics land her with a contempt of court charge. Leilani remained in jail without the possibility of bail, and she, of course, pleads not guilty. After months and months drag on, finally, in early October of this year, jury selection began for the trial of Leilani Simon. Pre-trial motions had the defense and prosecution fighting over submission of Leilani's journals as evidence, and then they were also arguing about submitting evidence in regards to Leilani's drug use and her mental state at the time of Quinton's murder. During the 8-day trial, jurors heard from over 36 prosecution witnesses, and they saw nearly 100 pieces of evidence. And the defense? Well, there wasn't really one. Leilani did not testify, and the defense did not call any witnesses. Despite no defense being mounted, this was still an uphill battle for the prosecution. They didn't really have any evidence of how Leilani killed Quinton, only that she was a drug-addicted mother who discarded her child's lifeless body in a dumpster. They said she would just leave out details or then change details from day to day. One of the biggest moments in the trial came when Leilani's ex-boyfriend, Daniel Youngkin, okay, he was the one living with her at the time, well, he took the stand and testified. And here's how that played out. In the home where Quinton lived, and also where Leilani lived, and where Daniel lived, and then, of course, the owners of the home, Leilani's parents, okay, they're all together. Daniel's living there, and he's not the most reliable dude. But at that point of the disappearance, he is employed, and he was at work on the morning of Quinton's disappearance. He testified that when Leilani called him on that morning, saying Quinton was gone, that he ran from his place of employment and he sped home to help with the search. Video evidence backs up this account. When he pulled into the family residence, he testified that Leilani was sitting outside, but she had yet to call the police. Daniel thought this was just so crazy, so he called 911. And then he said Leilani threw him a curveball. When police showed up, Leilani added all of these details about the disappearance that she hadn't even shared with him. He testified that this shocked him, and it also made him start questioning the events of the day. Daniel then testified that later on, the FBI had wiretapped Daniel's cell phone for months. Okay, this was with his permission. The FBI also outfitted a hotel room with audio and video surveillance, and they asked Daniel to invite Leilani to stay there with him. When that video footage, that evidence was played for the jurors, It showed Daniel repeatedly asking Leilani to repeat the events of the morning. He was basically questioning the variations in her story. Eventually, Leilani accused Daniel on video of working with the police. Now, other witness testimony had a 17-year-old babysitter who frequently watched Leilani's 2 other children and then also little Quinton. Well, she was testifying that she saw Leilani abuse Quinton. She also said that Leilani would delay feeding Quinton, but she would feed her other 2 children regularly. Other evidence presented documented that the Life 360 app had Leilani driving to the dumpster located in the Azalea Mobile Home Plaza and spending a couple of minutes there and then leaving that area. Leilani had claimed she was visiting a friend who lived in the mobile home park with the intent of picking up a teething medication. But that friend said that just wasn't true. And prosecutors contended that visit to the mobile home park is when Leilani discarded Quinton in the dumpster. Prosecutors also matched up the ADT records from the home to the time that they believed the body was discarded in the dumpster. They presented evidence that the dining room door to the exterior was open and closed multiple times just minutes before Leilani's phone traveled to the mobile home park where the dumpster was located. All right, after all of this was presented, it took only 6 hours for jurors to find Leilani guilty of all 19 charges. Those charges included malice murder, concealing of a death, and disposing of a body. Leilani will be sentenced at a later date. She faces up to life in prison for her actions. Chief Hadley, who invested days upon days in finding Quinton, told reporters after the verdict that Quinton Simon had truly become Chatham County's child during the weeks that the community was gripped by his disappearance. He said it was fitting that a jury of 12 men and women from the community delivered the final measure of justice for little Quinton with that guilty verdict. And weirdly, or maybe not, because I think this family has some, shall we say, issues, Leilani's mother did not attend a single day of the trial. She did tell reporters following the verdict that she was happy justice was served. Quinton's obituary remembered him as a bright, happy, fun, smart, loving little monkey. The memorial noted that he would say thank you whenever anything was given to him and that he loved to dance when there was music playing. When he tried to give a fist bump, he would raise his little hand and ask for a boom. And I did find that Quinton's 2 siblings, well, at least Fox News is reporting, that those 2 siblings were placed in foster care following the arrest of Leilani. I hope those 2 little kids are safe and thriving in a new environment. And now, let's unlock another version of terror. Okay, we know we should be terrified of rapists and of love triangles and teachers who groom children. But who knew that lizards the size of dogs were roaming South Carolina? Okay, there's no way I'm going out into my backyard to be greeted by a 4-foot-long lizard that can eat my little dog Q. But since 2020, when the first Argentine black and white tegu lizard was spotted in the wild in South Carolina, the invasive lizards have grown to an estimated population of about 100. Now, these hardy lizards with black and white spots, well, they eat just about anything. They aren't picky, which is why they're thriving. They will eat eggs, or they'll eat your pet food. They'll eat something as small as a grasshopper and then something as big as a turtle, and basically anything in between that. So you would think that the little boy tegus and the little girl tegus are finding each other and making little tegu families, but scientists say that's not what's happening in the wild. What they believe is actually going on to increase this population of the invasive lizard is pet owners are either tired of the lizard and releasing it into the wild, or the crafty lizards are getting out of their enclosures and escaping into the wild. From 2000 to 2010, almost 80,000 tegu lizards were imported into the United States from Argentina. The South Carolina Department of Natural Resources said the lizards have been spotted in 17 different counties over the last 4 years. All right, So why am I covering this on Rise in Crime, other than the original reason, which is that this is terrifying? Well, it's illegal to own the black and white tegu in South Carolina, yet the lizards are surviving in the wild after people let them go. Now, to keep a tegu as a pet in South Carolina, you have to register that pet with the state, and you can also not let that pet breed, and you had to own that pet prior to a certain date. Okay, here's why. Scientists think that once the aggressive lizard gets just a little bit bigger and older, the pet owners can't handle the lizard and its behaviors anymore, so they just release them in a wooded area or in a mountainous area. Lawmakers have made it legal, however, to shoot a black and white tegu, at least in certain areas of the state. So if one of the lizards is spotted, the SCDNR asks that you take a photo and contact them immediately with the exact location of the spotting. Now, we're entering a cooler period in South Carolina, and that means the lizards will begin to brumate, which basically is the equivalent of hibernating, but lizards are reptiles, so they brumate. And the lizard becomes immobile for several weeks. But those scary little suckers, they're going to wake back up, and they're going to come after your dog's food. So make sure you check out the social media post if you want to see a close-up version of this menacing lizard. And now to this developing story out of Texas, where a megachurch has removed 4 church elders from leadership for sexual abuse claims. The congregants were informed of the removal on Saturday during a worship service at the Gateway Church. Now, the 4 men were removed following an investigation that originated internally. So one the church said, hey, we need to look into. Now, this law firm, Haynes & Boone, they were hired after accusations were leveled against Gateway senior pastor and founder of the church, Robert Morris. Well, those allegations began surfacing earlier this year. The origins of the investigation stem back to a 5-year span from 1982 to 1987. A woman named Cindy Clemishire had claimed that Robert Morris had abused her during those years. Now, Robert has admitted to having inappropriate sexual behavior. Those are his words, not mine. So he's admitted to having inappropriate sexual behavior with Cindy, but he said it was not abuse. After admitting to the relationship, he resigned from the church. Now, this feels a little bit like old news, right? All of this broke earlier this year, and of course, these elders are going to be removed, but there's more to it than that. Elder Trey Wilbanks explained to the congregation that 3 of the 4 elders that were being removed from the church either knew about the abuse by Robert Morris or they failed to report the abuse by Robert. Here, I'll just read you what Elder Wilbanks said. We now know that there were elders and employees at Gateway who knew before June 14th of 2024 that Cindy was 12 years old at the time of the abuse. Both groups are fundamentally wrong and simply cannot and will not be tolerated at Gateway Church. He then later said to the congregation, we have decided to draw a very bright line here based on biblical and moral values and the values of our church family. And we can report to you that as of today, no individual in either group serves as an elder or is employed by or works at Gateway Church. They have been removed. Well, following those remarks by Elder Wilbanks, the congregation began clapping in approval. Wilbanks also said the church is cooperating with a criminal investigation. Wilbanks did clarify that, to his knowledge, there are no other victims besides Cindy. Now, from the pulpit, Elder Wilbanks didn't name the 4 men that were removed, but multiple outlets have identified them as elders Kevin Groh, Thomas Miller, Jeremy Carrasco, and Galen LaShaw. And to be fair, 3 of the 4 elders have said in a statement following the investigation that they were men of integrity who have served the Gateway Church with distinction and that they had no knowledge of the true facts of the situation. Well, back in June, remember when all of this started, NPR ran a story about the abuse scandal. In that story, we get more clarification than what was provided from the pulpit just last Saturday. But this kind of makes sense since most of the congregation probably had an idea of what was going on already, so it didn't need to be spoken from the pulpit. Well, in that NPR article, Cindy said the abuse by Robert began in 1982 when she was just 12 years old and Robert was 21 years old. Cindy and Robert knew each other because their families were friends, and Robert was working as a traveling preacher. Robert was married at the time, and he had a wife and a young son that would sometimes stay at Cindy's family home while they were all out and about traveling and preaching. Well, the first night of the alleged abuse was on Christmas of 1982. As the two, Robert and Cindy, ended up alone together in the home, Robert allegedly touched Cindy's breasts and let his hands roam beneath her underwear. Over the next 4 years, Cindy said Robert tried to accelerate the abuse to full intercourse. Okay, I'm just going to remind you guys, she's 12 years old, and he was 21 years old and married and had a kid. Now, the alleged abuse ended when Cindy told her parents about the previous 4 years. Cindy's father went to Robert and demanded that he get out of his ministry or else he would report the abuse to the authorities. That's when Robert took a 2-year break from the ministry. But after that, he resumed preaching. Robert said during those 2 years, he received counseling and fully repented of his, quote, moral failure. Again, his words, not mine. He's calling it a moral failure. Now, here's where the two sides kind of really disagree. Cindy says the elders, so the 4 that got removed from the church, well, she says they knew about her age, they knew about the extent of the abuse, and they knew about the grooming behavior. And like I said previously, the elders are saying they didn't know the true facts of the allegations, only that the abuse happened 35 years prior, and that Robert felt like he had completely handled his, again, quote, moral failure. Now, Cindy says she has proof in the form of an email saying that one of the elders acknowledged that the abuse began on Christmas Day of 1982 when Cindy was just 12 years old. That would mean that elder was fully aware of her age. Cindy also said she had her attorney reach out to Robert in 2007, asking him to at least take some financial responsibility in the matter and pay her back for the hours of counseling and also for her attorney fees. She said Robert's attorney acknowledged the dates of the abuse, but then tried to turn the tables and make Cindy the aggressor in the situation. A settlement was proposed during that time, but Robert's attorney insisted that as part of the settlement, that Cindy must sign a non-disclosure agreement. Well, Cindy refused and she walked away. And of course, as true to most of these cases, Robert is pretty much being mum on the matter. He's relying on his attorneys to do the talking, except they aren't talking either. And the church is trying to move forward following the tumultuous summer and the self-assigned law firm investigation. The church is also relying on the statement from the pulpit to answer any questions by the media. Just as a side note, if you're interested, you can find more about this specific abuse allegation at the Wartburg Watch. Again, that's the Wartburg Watch. That's a blog that's dedicated to examining abuse and other issues in various religions. All right, I'm going to add something new to the end of the episode of Rise in Crime, at least once a week, maybe twice. It'll just depend. But we had a suggestion by one of our listeners that I start sharing some of the comments that have been made on the previous stories. Since this is a news podcast, and I ask for your feedback, let's maybe just slowly update via the comments. And I thought, hey, that's a great idea. So let's do this. So specifically, I'm going to share some comments about my story that I brought you about Peanut, the squirrel. That's the squirrel that got euthanized by the DEC in New York. And man, it has gone viral everywhere. Well, let me share some of the comments from the YouTube listeners about Peanut the squirrel. Somebody called OKSanats17086. They said, R.I.P. Peanut and Raccoon. They were so sad that this squirrel and this raccoon died. And then Elizabeth 4614 said, beyond heartbroken for Peanut and the innocent raccoon. How are they keeping animals safe by tearing them from their homes and basically murdering them? Sending so much love to all the victims and families for these stories. There was more like that, more that were touched by the fact that Squirrel and Fred the raccoon were just euthanized. Well, I want to kind of bring you an update that's happened since that time. I did some quick checking, and bomb threats have been made to the New York State offices of the people who euthanized Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon. Now, due to the bomb threats, employees were allowed to work remotely on Monday and Tuesday, so just a couple of days ago. DEC offices in Allegheny, Bath, Buffalo, Cortland, New Paltz, New York City, Sherburne, Stony Brook, Syracuse, and Tarrytown. Okay, I hope I said all of those right. They all received various bomb threats. Now, none of the bomb threats or the threats to DEC employees or their families were deemed to be legitimate. This, at least according to the Times Union publication. And the social media firestorm surrounding Peanut's death, well, it just keeps getting bigger. Elon Musk got involved and he wrote a post on X saying, "Vote for Peanut, for liberty, for freedom." Okay, that simple post has been viewed over 33 million times. Then in a separate post, Elon Musk wrote that the government shouldn't be able to just barge into your home and kill your pet. And there is some good news for Mark Longo. That's Peanut's owner, who has been devastated by the killing of Fred and Peanut. Well, his GoFundMe has raised about $200,000 in honor of Peanut and Fred. He has vowed the donations with that GoFundMe will all go to the Peanut Freedom Farm. And then I just wanted to read this one comment by M. Burke OKO 8699. This happened about a week ago. It was about my story from Utah with the cyclist that kind of was like a male Karen and went crazy and blocked that young kid that I thought was just awesome and so chill and so cool. Well, this is what that person said. I love it. The cyclist said his name is Gary Peacock. That's Gary Peacocking. And you guys, I love your comments. Thank you so much for being part of this community. That's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. Please leave me more comments. I love to hear what you have to think about these cases. Some of the laws are really questionable, and I love your feedback because that's the way we make laws better and we make crime less frequent. If you haven't had a chance yet, please leave a 5-star review on whatever app you listen on. Make sure you give it a thumbs up or a like or a follow. That really helps the podcast grow. We have 3 podcasts here at Oh No Media. We're so proud of all of them. That's Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and of course, Rise in Crime. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.